Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our coffee chat with the Saskatoon Council on Aging. We are really happy to have with us once again Dr. Megan O'Connell, who has done several presentations for us during this pandemic. And I hope you enjoy her presentation today on resilience in the pandemic. For guests who may be new to the Saskatoon Council on Aging, we offer many services, including information, referrals, and resources of interest to older adults. We have some free monthly social programs. Our Seniors Neighborhood Hub Club would be one of our more popular ones. We have lifelong learning programs. We have our Telephone Buddy program, Seniors Mastering Technology program, the Century Club for adults 90 years and older, the Globe Walk program to keep people motivated and moving during the winter months by forming teams and staying active. We have a free directory of services and activities for older adults. We have monthly newsletters to keep you informed about our events. We have a caregiver information and support service. As well, we identify and act on unmet needs of older adults and support older adults to lead healthy, independent lives and to be active and socially engaged. You can call us at our office anytime at 306-652-2255 to find out more. If you are having any questions during this webinar, please click on your chat icon on your screen and then type your questions into the chat box. For some, the bottom right-hand corner. On my iPad, it's the top right-hand corner. We just also wanted to mention, if you are needing some assistance in booking vaccines, getting your immunization, you could call our central office and they'll help you to do that. There's also some students available today to provide technical support. And if you need help, please call 306-361-3805. And SCOA can also assist you if you need some help. So to give you that number once again, 306-652-2255. I'd now like to welcome our moderator for the afternoon. Shan Landry will be well known to many of you. She's a lifelong member of the Saskatoon community and is committed to improving the quality of life and health of all. Shan worked for 34 years at the Saskatoon Health Region, now called the Saskatchewan Health Authority. And for many of those years, she served as the Vice President of Community Services. Shan is passionate about the determinants of health and working with others to create a system and a community that sponsors and supports the mind, body, and soul. In her retirement, Shan is offering her knowledge and enthusiasm through consulting and as a volunteer with a number of organizations. She's served on the board of the Saskatoon Council on Aging as the chair and also continues to volunteer on our Age-Friendly Community Development Committee. Welcome, Shan.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here again. I have tuned into all of the coffee chats that SCOA has had, and I've served as a moderator on a few of them. So it feels like a comfortable seat to be in. And I always enjoy the hour-long discussion and the questions that people send in. I always start off by reminding people that we call this a coffee chat. So I hope that people at home that are watching and listening are making themselves comfortable. We can't see you, so you can be sitting in your easy chair with your feet up if necessary. Also, I did bring along my cup of coffee, and I'll try to take a surreptitious little sip every once in a while when no one's looking, and I'll try not to choke, but just to make it into a true coffee chat. I was especially pleased to be asked to moderate today this second session on mental health with our guest, Dr. Megan O'Connell. Megan and I did a chat about a month ago now, I think it was, Megan, and we got a lot of positive feedback. And as I said, I truly enjoyed the hour-long discussion. It seemed to go very fast. So today, partly at the suggestion of a number of people who'd been watching last time, we're going to zero in a little bit on mental health issues and talk more about social isolation and resilience, because those are two things that have come up in discussions, certainly that many of us have had over the last year or so. But before I actually start in with the questions, I would like to formally introduce Dr. Megan O'Connell. And as much as I wish I'd memorized her introduction, I need to read it off here, Megan. Welcome to Megan from the Council on Aging and all people who are listening today. Megan received her PhD from the University of Victoria, Clinical Psychology Program, Neuropsychology Emphasis. She researches issues in assessment and intervention for dementia, mild cognitive impairment, and cognitive aging. She is a professor in the graduate program in clinical psychology at the University of Saskatchewan. She practices in the Interdisciplinary Diagnostic Memory Clinic, Rural and Remote Memory Clinic. She co-leads Team 15 in the Canadian Consortium on Neurodegeneration in Aging, where she leads the newly developed Rural and Remote Memory Clinic Interventions, RRMCI for short, for Saskatchewan residents. That's what she does. The RRMCI involves behavioral and psychological interventions tailored to persons with cognitive impairment or dementia and their caregivers. Interventions are done by telehealth, internet, video conferencing to ensure accessibility for rural families. And since last March, over a year ago now, Megan has been working with SCOA to support older adults in the use of video conferencing or other technologies to maintain social connections. And that has been an invaluable resource for us over the last year, and I think a really fruitful partnership, Megan.
I agree. Really great. And very important, I think, so.
Yes, it has proven to be. And I think all of us would not even have the facility we do have in using the technology today for this coffee chat if it weren't for some of the coaching and the assistance that we've had over the time. So thanks again.
Oh, you're welcome.
And as I said, last time our conversation generated a lot of questions and ideas from listeners. But I wanted to start off today, not so much zeroing right in on isolation and resilience, but just an overall comment about the fact that as I've been consuming news reports and reading different articles, watching television, it seems like, especially in the last 6 months or so, mental health issues have become much more talked about. They just seem to be much more out in the open now, and people are sharing with others about the fact that this pandemic has really been, in some cases, taking a toll on their mental health. So I wondered if you have noticed that, and if you would say that maybe one small positive is the idea that maybe people are a little bit more willing to talk about mental health now than they were before. Is that what you're finding?
Well, I like to also agree with you. I hope that is the case. And I think there's a couple of things that might help with the mental health stigma, which of course has been a stigma for years. And hopefully the increased discussion helps with that. Where more importantly, everyone kind of reflecting on their own mental health and realizing that mental health is a continuum from ideal functioning to, more severe dysfunction. And because of that, we all experience different aspects of mental health and mental health concerns and mental health struggles. And therefore, maybe it shouldn't be so stigmatized. So I do hope that will be a positive outcome. But I did a lit review last night to see if anybody's actually researched that yet. And they have not yet. But I do believe, not yet. But I do believe that some person, not me, who studies stigma, it's actually not my area of research, will be probably looking at this. I think it's going to be a very interesting avenue of research to see if that is indeed the case.
Yeah, and in fact, as somebody who does research, I certainly think that all sorts of things are cropping up during the pandemic that are flashing red lights for people to devote the next number of years on all sorts of things that we've noticed, because our whole social behavior has been changed and different. For sure.
Yeah, this will be fodder for dissertations for years to come.
Exactly. And would you say that there's a difference in mental health issues that are cropping up for older adults in comparison with other age groupings? Or is that not a good comparison to use?
Yeah, no, it's actually a good question, in part because when I started this work, I started because I was quite concerned about mental health for older adults. And then some research has come out throughout the past year actually suggesting that mental health in older adults has not suffered as much as it has in other age groups. So, which I think when we go to resilience, maybe we can conjecture about why that's the case. So this pandemic has impacted people's mental health. And of course, you know, it has impacted the mental health of seniors or older adults, excuse me, as well, but not as much, apparently, according to one of the research studies that are out there. And there's a few of them suggesting that it's really, really impacting mothers of children who are, you know,
Okay.
having to, some of them are having to leave the workplace because they no longer have access to childcare and they're trying to do it. So it seems to be impacting everybody. So, and if not to diminish the impacts on older adults, but as a group, from the research, it looks like they're doing a little better. So,
Okay, which is good to know, because getting into that first subject we were going to talk about, social isolation, certainly because I do lots of work and spend a lot of my time with older adults, I hear lots from them. Not only older adults who live in residential care or assisted living, but even people who live out in the community who are really feeling the toll that it's taken for lack of contact with friends and especially grandchildren. I hear so many people talking about the fact that they've been sealed off from their grandchildren for over a year now, and the sadness that fills them with. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the prolonged effects of isolation on older adults.
yeah. So, I will preface that by saying I don't think this blip in a year is going to have these effects. So I don't want to scare anyone, because
Okay.
I think that much of the research on social isolation and the impacts of it are more prolonged periods. You know, everybody has had social isolation to some degree, depending on what you do, or, you know, if you have to work outside the home, for instance. But I do believe that we as people and humans are resilient and we will bounce back. But let's talk about the research on what we know pre-pandemic on people who have prolonged social isolation. And it is not good for your health. It's not good for your mental health, as you're likely not surprised, but it's also not good for your cognitive health. So it's actually associated with accelerated cognitive aging. And it's also not good for your physical health. So you
Okay.
have these impacts that are multifaceted. And loneliness, I just want to, you know, maybe go back and remind everyone, because social isolation is what we're all feeling right now. And sometimes that's accompanied with loneliness. And loneliness is a subjective feeling that you want more connection than you're getting. So even if, and this is why I wanted to partner so early with SCOA, is if you can help people get a virtual connection, even though it's not ideal, but at least you get a virtual connection, you might be able to mitigate the impact of that social isolation on loneliness, which is a separable construct, right? You can be socially isolated, like I have. I haven't really, you know, seen anyone outside my house for,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much a long time. You know, but I have lots of virtual contacts, right? So that's the
Right.
whole goal, is to maintain socialization, even if it's not in person, to mitigate it impacting or it causing loneliness. But I
Yeah.
will say that there are subgroups and subgroups, I mean, based on personality styles. So some of us, I happen to be an introvert, I'm quite introverted, I like to spend time by myself, that's how I rejuvenate. This hasn't actually been that bad for me, but I know anecdotally, for people who are extroverted and really used to getting social contacts every day, they're out socializing or
Mhm.
talking to somebody, and phone contact isn't as good for them as that in-person contact. For that group, this is likely, no matter what, even if we do the virtual socialization, this is still going to likely cause loneliness, is my suspicion.
Okay, okay. I think I see what you mean, because end up doing a lot of these Zoom calls every day. But on the days when I don't have them, I feel even worse because somehow it feels like I haven't talked to another soul or made any kind of connection. Even as much as I say I am so tired of only connecting virtually, and I want to be in the same room, I want to sit and have a cup of coffee or go to a restaurant and have lunch with my friends. And that's one of the first things I'll do when we're freer to do it.
I'm so looking forward to going back to restaurants.
Yes, yes.
I know they're open, so I know some people are doing it, but
some,
and I'm of that, also following the regulations and being extra cautious. So
right. So, I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying, there are some effects of this prolonged isolation on us. And you said about accelerating some cognitive things. So does that mean I'm thinking slower, my memory isn't as good, I'm forgetting things?
Yeah, and as I said, this is like research is based on people who have loneliness for several years. So accumulation of this loneliness seems to make memory worse. So you're more likely to have, accelerated declines in memory. But we don't obviously know the answers from the pandemic yet. And I'm sure everybody is going to have a blip in their functioning from this pandemic, but I also wholeheartedly believe that because this is a collective trauma, let's call it this. One, we're not alone. And two, when we are able to get back, I believe we will bounce back and we won't necessarily see some of these long-term effects. Having said that, there are, and I think we talked about this last time, when you have some faster changes going on in your life, and that includes people with neurodegenerative concerns where things are changing faster, this 1-year blip is pretty impactful. But if if you look at the lifespan trajectory and you're healthy aging and you're aging really healthily, having 1 year of your life be less than ideal, I am hoping, and I don't know the answer to this, that we can bounce back from it and we won't see, like, all this research I can talk about is really, I don't know if it's going to apply to people who had this 1-year blip.
Okay,
so I don't know the answer, but that's my hope.
Really interesting take on it, because I hadn't heard it from that point of view. And I'd heard people saying things like people might be awkward at first and a little bit ill at ease, or being in crowds because we haven't been in them for so long.
And I think we should talk about that, because I agree. I think that's going to happen, but we're all going to be in that same boat. Right. So that's, this is so all the research, and I mean, maybe you've seen some of this research. They talk about kids and how this is really hard on them. They've never had a circumstance where this has happened to the whole cohort. Right. This is everybody. This is unprecedented. All the research really can't tell us about what this is going to look like for us.
Sure.
So yes, so I believe, and again, I don't know the answers, obviously, but the fact that this is collective, the fact that we're all going to say, oh my goodness, I get to go with my friend, it feels so weird, it's surreal, sitting across the table from you, I can touch you, I'm going to spontaneously touch you without asking you, because I haven't touched another human being. Like, I feel like because this is more collective, I think we will be able to talk about it a bit more, be a bit more explicit about it, and, support each other through this awkwardness. So anytime you have something that happens for you in the mental health sphere, a lot of the challenges are where you don't talk about things and where it's hidden and it's not reflected upon. I'm hoping, as I said, that because we're all going to be experiencing this together, it might be a different experience than all in the past.
One of the other things that occurred to me when you're talking is also, not only is this a collective experience, but one of the things I've talked to my friends about is the fact that usually in life, I'm used to having choices. Like, I can control certain things in my life. I can control whether I go out or don't go out, who I see, who I don't see. For most of us, this has not been by our choice. This has sort of been imposed upon us. Now, we can say, I can choose to defy the rules and do whatever I feel like, but most of us are pretty law abiding and are doing our best because we understand the public health piece of it. But having control is also an issue related to mental health, is it not?
Hugely, yeah. A sense of agency and choice. Yes, absolutely. And that's that's a very big part of this is that feeling of lack of control. And I think I do believe that people, so I'm being hopeful on one hand, but I also think that as the world comes back to normal, we will see people use that agency. Some people may have a harder time in reintegrating and kind of giving up some of that, the fear. And I believe that, again, that's your agency. But for me as a clinician, when agency is taken over by mental health concerns like anxiety or, depression, then that's, something that would be fodder for getting some help. But I do, yes, absolutely. The fact that we have no choice, or we feel we have no choice, and this is imposed upon us, and we're helpless and we can't do anything.
Right.
Is part of why this is part of why I refer to this, and it's not me the only person who said this, but I refer to this as a collective trauma that we've all experienced.
Right, right. Is there anything that tips that you would give as we do look forward, as we do sort of think about reintegrating? I don't believe that it's going to be one day when they suddenly say the gates are open, everybody do whatever you feel like now, that it'll be a gradual thing. But is there anything we could do psychologically to get ourselves ready for that? Or the opposite is to talk myself into the fact that I have to do this for a while longer, which some days is really hard because I want it to be over.
Yeah, it is really hard. And I wish I had a simple answer for that. Other than we can talk about just general things for mental health. So, so that's one question. So maybe if I forget to go back to that, if you can remind me. But I'd like to talk about like what we can do to prepare ourselves for the end. And I'm very hopeful, despite the fact that it's really bad right now. We also have something really good on the horizon. So I just believe it'll be a few months of really badness, and I think it will get better. But what do we do when we begin to, open things up and reintegrate? I first of all think you should expect that you will have a psychological reaction to it. And it could be anxiety, and it could be a sense of things aren't real, or it could be euphoria, obviously, but we're not so worried about that one. But I think expecting, even though you think it's going to be great, realizing that it was a little harder for you than you anticipated might help people to kind of plan for it.
Okay.
And to think, although I really want this, there's a lot to it that might make it a bit more challenging. And maybe don't plan something massive at the beginning. Maybe don't plan this huge, I want to have parties all the time and see all the people I haven't seen, right? Like, don't plan that initially. Get yourself started with something a bit smaller. Maybe do fewer things at the beginning, see how you feel, and then slowly increase it. So that's kind of the premise underlying any kind of, so if somebody had, say, an anxiety disorder, treatment for it is actually doing the thing you're most anxious about. Believe it or not, that's the most effective treatment. But they don't just flood it all. Flooding does help actually, but nobody signs up for that type of therapy. They do it kind of gradually, and you just kind of slowly habituate or get used to those feelings, and slowly it no longer rules your life. And slowly maybe you had the fear of spiders, and it was debilitating, and you couldn't go anywhere because you were so scared you'd see a spider in the summer. And that happens in Saskatchewan. And therapy for arachnophobia, or that fear of spiders, is actually slowly getting you used to spiders in different ways. First with pictures, then with videos, and then maybe you'd actually have a spider, and maybe you'd even be exposed to having a spider on your palm, for instance. You actually do the thing you're most fearful of. That is the treatment for this. Extremely effective. And you may never like spiders, but at least it doesn't rule your life. So it's getting used to the thing you're most afraid of. So I have, so if my kids are scared of something, I'm like, well, then you have to do it. You know, I have a different reaction. It's like, no, you get to avoid it. No. If you're scared, that's when you do it. And you just don't do a lot of it. You take care of yourself. You do some, you take care of yourself. You do some more and you take care of yourself. And
Okay.
that's kind of the premise, I think, if you find anxiety going out, and awkwardness and it's very fearful, just do a little bit and just kind of, you know, and then do a little bit more and then do a little bit more. And sooner or later, those fears of being around others, maskless, for instance, or whatever it is, fear becomes, or however this world looks like in the future, you will habituate and you will get used to it again.
Okay.
You
Okay.
will go back to normal. You will always have this year of our lives or more where things are, you know, quite disrupted, but things will go back.
Okay. What about, because you do a lot of work with people who have cognitive impairment, what about those individuals? Because I know many of them with their essential family caregivers might have been reminded daily who they were, who their family was, whatever, and now they're missing that. So they may have forgotten who you are or what. How do I get myself psyched up to the fact that my loved one may have completely forgotten who I am, and although I may have known it was going to happen eventually, it's kind of cold turkey.
Yeah, it's accelerated. So as I said,
Yeah.
we have these fast changes this year where I'm trying to say, let's not worry too much about it, really does impact that subgroup.
Right.
And that is indeed what we see. And more importantly, at least with the people we have worked with or studied who have lived experience of dementia, they don't understand why somebody hasn't visited them. So they might actually be really upset when you see them and feel
Right.
like you abandoned them, right? And that can be even more challenging. Not that not being remembered isn't challenging, because it really hugely is as well. But let's like assume the worst case. So this is the other technique in therapy, is let's assume the worst case and let's see if we can work through it. Like assuming the worst case and they don't remember and they're angry, that again, with time, exposure, and kindness, will dissipate. And there will be, you know, a new formation of something, a connection, emotional connection with somebody who's kind, even if they don't remember that you're their spouse, for instance.
Right.
You know, so you will still create a new bond, a new relationship. It just might take some time, and I guess maybe expecting it. And especially, I can imagine we've seen some of it, heartbreak, where the person who's living with dementia in a long-term care facility thought you abandoned them.
Yeah.
Like how heartbreaking it is it for you to have that happen and for them to have had that happen. So
yeah. Yeah, and the other piece, just to draw a little bit of a parallel, is many of us who haven't been able to see newborn children or grandchildren who are very young, and you know, if they're far away anyway, we always have that sense of they won't know who I am, and yet I can imagine with younger children, you just have to take your time, and eventually you will become a figure in their life again, and you just got to do your best with that, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I would say probably very similar processes is if you're going in, if you're expecting somebody to not be able to remember you, either developmentally as a young child or with cognitive changes, which maybe expecting that you can't be as familiar at the beginning, right? Because it might feel odd for them. So maybe not rushing in to invade personal space and give a hug, even though it's the one thing you really want to do, kind of waiting back and saying, hey, would you like to come, you know, give me a hug? You may not remember me. I'm grandma. We haven't seen you since you were a little baby and you haven't really seen me. You know, maybe just stepping back a bit, because because if they react in a way that you're not expecting, because you know that they are your grandchild and they don't know their grandmother, for instance, and then they react that could hurt your feelings and you know, but if you think about their point of view, they don't mean it like that at all. No. They just, because, oh, my cat's gonna jump on me, because just pretend they're like cats. The cat, they have to come to you because of the fact that they just don't know you and they're scared potentially.
Right.
Right? If you're very familiar and they think you're a stranger, and it will
Sure.
come back. It will.
Okay.
I
Okay.
promise you.
Okay.
It just might take a bit.
I wanted to ask you about grieving, but I'm going to jump in because your cat is there and talk a little bit about resiliency, because I've also read that people say that one of the things over this pandemic that's been keeping them a little bit more sane and grounded is pets.
Yes.
Do you agree with that? I mean, obviously you're a pet owner.
Absolutely. Any kind of, I know we usually think about socialization in terms of other humans, but it can be anything, right?
Yeah.
It can be something that gives you back love. And I will say in many ways, for some people, depending on their circumstances in their life, their pet is the only source of unconditional love. So, although I do hope for each and every single one of you listening, you do have many sources of unconditional love in your life. And that's something I'd wish on everyone.
Right.
But pets are hugely helpful in terms of being able to give that, they may not give the intellectual stimulation that your friends do when you talk to them on the phone or on Zoom, but they can give you the physical affection that you're lacking in this socially distance. So the one thing that nobody's figured out how to do is how to give a hug over Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't do that yet. So having that physical contact is very important and very helpful for people. Yes, definitely. Pets are hugely helpful. Yeah.
Well, we've used the word resiliency a few times, and maybe we bandy it about too loosely, but it just makes me think of people who are strong and can withstand a lot of pressures, trauma, whatever, and seem to be able to bounce back. Can you describe to us from a psychologist perspective, what's resiliency? And if I don't have it, how do I get it?
Yeah. Okay, good. Because I actually had to prepare that part because this is not, this is not one of my strengths. Last time we went off into the cognitive stuff, which is my area. So I did have to look into this a bit. And there's different domains or different aspects of resiliency. So we all know about health resiliency, and the more conditions you have, the less resiliency you have. That's okay. That's one thing. But we also think about psychological resiliency. And that's just kind of your personality type traits. And then there's emotional resiliency, which is related but separable, which is your emotional reactivity and how well you tolerate emotional highs and lows, either from yourself or others. And physical resiliency, of course, is related to health resiliency. But the other thing is really important is resiliency isn't static. And you may not have the same resiliency in all those domains at any time. So you could be really resilient in health and not so much in emotional, for instance, at any one time. And then that could change depending on the circumstances and on how much you've kind of thought or worked in those areas. So I think to me, that's a good news that resiliency is something that changes, because you can work on building it. And you need it more when you have adverse conditions. So right now we have adverse conditions. So right now we're relying on our resiliency more, and trying to build it, I think, is really, good and important. And there's, anyway, so I'll let you ask more questions because I can go.
Well, I'm just thinking, is it too simple to say those of us who've got lots of life experience and we've had traumas may have learned a way of dealing with some of these adverse things better than others who lived a more charmed life or who are younger?
No, there's definitely something to that. In fact, it's very interesting because older adults are less likely to have depression than younger adults. So isn't that so? Yes, one of the myths of aging is that older adults are more likely to have depression. In fact, in prevalence and incidence, are less likely than younger middle-aged adults. When they get depression, though, it has a huge impact. So it's harder to treat. So there's a lot of things there. But part of the reason they think that is because older adults have a lifespan of learning and perspective taking, and just by nature of this, they have developed resilience. And it's even, you know, this statistic, which has been shown time and time again about, you know, prevalence and incidence rates of depression, is that older adults, in fact, have experienced way more adversity likely as a group than younger and middle-aged adults. Typically, older adults have had losses of friends or family or family. So there's a lot more developmentally expected losses in one's life, physical losses in terms of, you know, physical changes or medical comorbidities, for instance, or maybe, you know, very many older adults live with chronic pain due to arthritis. I mean, these are all losses, and you would therefore think, and this is why it's a myth of aging, you would therefore think that they're more likely to have depression, and in fact, they're less likely. And I do think it has a lot to do with this notion of resiliency, and part of it is being able to put things in perspective, and part of it is you've just dealt with so much throughout your lifespan that you have this sense of self-efficacy, that you can deal with this next new thing, right? You've done it before. It may not be exactly the same circumstance.
Sure.
You've done it before, so you know you can do it again.
Okay, so you talked about, you know, us practicing and rehearsing a little bit on the isolation piece, or you said when people have a great fear and anxiety, best thing to do is expose yourself to it and get used to it. Can we do that with resiliency? Can we develop resiliency? And what advice would you give to people listening out there? They want to be able to withstand this better. What should they be doing?
Yeah, so I mean, much like my suggestion for anxiety, it's best done with therapy. So that's the first caveat, is you can do it on your own, but it's a lot more painful and takes a lot longer. So that would be one thing to say. But there's a couple of things in the literature that suggest people can do to build resiliency. And I, as I said, I did have to look this up. This is not my area of expertise, but I am a psychologist, so it's not like that.
Yeah.
So positive attributes like optimism, which is really hard to do, especially right now. Isn't it really hard to do?
Yeah.
Feel optimistic. Optimism, trying as much as possible to purposely try and see the optimistic point of view. That's one little piece. You know, what else? So yeah, turning negative thoughts into more positive acceptance, which is a hard one. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. And I'd say that a lot of counseling or therapy is geared at taking a real tragic loss, whether that be from a trauma experience or from accumulation of life losses, and trying to change the focus of the thoughts and ruminations about the loss into accepting that this is lost, but what else do I still have? So that's like, it's not easy. Because if it was that easy, you'd all have done it already, right? But like, these are the things that through working with somebody, you can help them build that kind of
one of the things that several of my friends have said is that they try to do that sort of gratitude thing. Like they try to think about, okay, so yeah, I'm stuck in my house, but at least I have a house.
So that's exactly true. That's even
I'm tired of my own cooking, but at least I have food. Yeah.
So taking that, you know, instead of thinking and ruminating about the negative, because thinking about the negative thoughts actually perpetuates thinking about more negative thoughts. So it's, and in fact, people who spend a lot of time thinking about negative thoughts, and that's called rumination, it's actually, it looks like it precedes, you know, it's a consequence of depression, but it can also precede depression. So it can come before a depressive episode. So trying as much as you can to not go there. Now, don't deny it. So this is, I'm going to, at the same time, denying your negative thoughts is not healthy either. So this is a bit of a challenge, which is why, as I said, it's easiest to do in therapy, where you can have a spot where you can go and approach these negative thoughts and at the same time kind of get into the acceptance mode. And as I said, that's not that hard. And gratitude practices can be really helpful for that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about, I mean, we talked about pets, what about faith?
Faith,
a lot of research, as I've read anyway, says that people with a strong spiritual base or some sort of faith often, not always, but often are people who are more resilient or stronger in their outlook.
Yeah.
So would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. So the people, so there's attributes of people with high, who are high in resiliency, and I can read those to you in a sec. But social, spirituality is one of them. And I think part of that is because it's easier, or many spiritual practices help people move from experiences into acceptance. So, you know, that psychological process of moving from thinking about that negative or whatever that experience is into acceptance.
Mhm,
I think that's
mhm.
so core to a lot of spiritual practices. But the other things I think spirituality, and the reason why it comes out in the research is so critical, is for many people it includes a faith-based group and socialization. So socialization, let's go back to this because this is really important, whether it be a virtual socialization or otherwise, but that's another huge way to maintain your or build your resiliency. And it's very tempting for people who have a history of depression to then go into their hole and withdraw from others. And ironically, that is when you actually need to force yourself to go reach out to others, because reaching out and socializing is really critical, particularly when you're feeling at your lowest. So that's
Okay. Okay. I'm going to open it up to questions from other people. They've been coming in. I see
I can
them.
talk
But
more though about how to build resiliency.
well, that's what I was going to ask you. Before I do that, or as I do that, can you give me that list of
Yeah, of
attributes?
what, okay, of what is the people who are highest in resiliency.
Yeah.
Older adults who have high resiliency engage in pro-social behaviors, which we're all doing right now by not, you know, violating public health orders. For instance, that's a pro-social behavior. Anything that really is to the betterment of society is what is considered pro-social. A strong self-efficacy. So as I commented on this a bit before about how I think older adults tend to be resilient because of life experiences and saying, I've dealt with that before, I can do it again. And in fact, that is one of those activities that you can do to help build the resiliency, is to think, okay, I've had a circumstance, not exactly the same as this one, especially right now in the pandemic, we've never seen this before. But, you know, I had a circumstance that was kind of like this, and I dealt with that this way, and I was okay in the end. And pondering and really thinking about that so that you can really get at that deeper sense of self-efficacy for dealing with this new challenge. Because building your self-efficacy sometimes through reflecting on similar experiences that you were able to do in the past and then, you know, moving forward. But one thing I really want to note is this doesn't just happen naturally. You have to actually stop and think about it. So maybe that's the pretty key thing about building resiliency, is you need to do some self-reflection. Yeah, so strong self-efficacy is related to resiliency. Positive self-esteem, so focusing on the parts of you that you like instead of always focusing on the negative parts. So I have this habit, for instance, when I look in a mirror, I just look at the one part I like and I look at the rest. You know, whatever you can do to you know, maintain your positive self-esteem. So positive self-esteem is, you know, an important. And for some people, when they're feeling low, the only thing they can think of, and this is common when you're depressed, is you can't think of the positive things. That's a feature of depression. You just have these negative glasses on, you can't see anything else. For some people, like in therapy, you start with the positive self-esteem is, well, you don't hurt other people. You're pro-social, for instance. Like you can, you know, even if you have to go right back to the I mean well part of your self-esteem, is just reflecting and thinking about the parts of you that you feel good about. And the more you think about that, the more you can start to see other things, and the more you build this muscle essentially of self-esteem, which helps with resiliency. So we're not used to thinking like this, I know, but it really is important to try and focus on building that sense of self-esteem. And as I said, I think because you know, of the life experiences and that higher sense of self-efficacy older adults have by having had a lot, they also might build positive self-esteem through realizing that, you know, they can see their interactions with many people, and they can see a lot more of the positive parts of their life. So that's why.
Okay.
That people who are really high in resiliency have a sense of purpose. So
okay.
So whether that be a hobby, and this is where spirituality helps too. So spirituality is the next one, but it goes past here. A sense of purpose. So something, whether that's engaging with your grandchildren, or knitting, or I'm just using knitting as an example because that's what my mother does a lot of, you know, doing something that's, you know, gives you a sense of purpose. And I think that's huge for resiliency. And spirituality, again, you know, is a separate domain, but linked obviously to that one. People who are higher in spirituality, and that doesn't mean just, you know, to clarify, it doesn't mean you're you know, immersed in formal religious faith-based spirituality. Can go beyond that. So and humor, ability to use humor is huge. If you can see what's funny in a bad situation, you're way more likely to deal with adversity. And that unfortunately can't be forced. I think that has to come naturally. So trying to laugh about something that's horrible is not going to help you if you're not actually seeing the humor in it. Being creative, being creative about solutions, being creative about how you see things is another thing about is resiliency. Striving toward some goal achievement. So even if it's a short-term goal, this is why a lot of people do really well. And I know you guys have a gardening thing next week. This is excellent, right? You know, goals. I've got a goal. I'm gonna, you know, learn how to contain a garden and have some beautiful flowers that I don't kill. That would be a nice goal. That's a good goal achievement. So there's many different ways to see goal achievement, and they don't have to be, you know, what they would have been earlier in your life when you were in the workforce or anything. They can be, you know, anything really, but having a goal, working toward it. Attitudes that are positive, I talked about that before. Being flexible, which, you know, is one of those traits that you can build and work in. And I think older adults, just by virtue of having had so many different experiences, tend to have some flexibility, right? You've seen a lot of different ways to do something or to think about something. And you talked about this, so on just my list here, finally, self-determination is pretty key. And right? We don't have that sense of agency, and we're in control of the situation. So as much as you can, having that is good. And then finally, optimism is a big part of resiliency.
One of our listeners asked a really interesting question, which is, do you find a difference between men and women? Is there a gender difference?
Yeah.
You know, is one gender more, you know, renowned for its resiliency, or does that have nothing to do with it really?
Yeah, I think it looks different. It looks different for that. It's a gender-based thing. And some of it is in a lot of those differences occur in socialization. There are differences in using your social network by genders, and females on average, of course, are more likely to have spontaneously throughout their lifespan used a social network. And males on average, of course, are more likely to have not had a very large social network and more likely to rely on their primary romantic partner. So that could be a big shift if that changes for a variety of reasons. So females are socialized throughout their lifespan to turn to others. So this is definitely a gendered thing that we do see
right. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of it, but yeah. So even how we're trying to develop resiliency may be different for men and women because of our own feelings of comfort level in doing certain things. Yeah, yeah.
But those internal work, though, can be the same for males and females. It's just how much of it is shared with others tends to be a bit more gendered.
Yeah. I'm not seeing a lot of questions come across here, but I may be missing them. But I know someone earlier on had asked about grief and loss. You know, we're also missing, I'm not sure it has to do with resiliency, but it does to do with isolation, in that we can't have our rituals that we normally have. Like, how many of those obituaries say to be held later, some celebration of life? And I think, wow, we're postponing something that we take for granted as one of our ways of coping with the loss of someone we love. You know, would you say that that's another issue we're going to have to deal with in the future?
Yeah, I actually agree it is. I did try to do it because you gave me that question ahead of time. Thank goodness, because it's a toughie. And I did do a lit review because this is a question everyone's asking is the fact that we can't participate in our grieving rituals in the same way going to impact our mental health in the long run? And of course, the problem is all the research that it was able to be based on is different than this. And there are going to be a multitude of factors as to why people can and cannot participate in those grieving rituals. So this research, according to this, and of course it was written for the pandemic to try and inform what we're doing now,
Right.
suggested that really, at least based on the research that was done prior to the pandemic, it did not impact people's grieving rituals, believe it or not, which to me seemed a little counterintuitive. And
Yeah.
I worry about there are many reasons why people would not have participated in the grieving rituals in the past, prior to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it probably had more or was more consistent with their self-agency or self-determination. I think right now, I feel like that pandemic has taken that away from us. So I do not necessarily know if I think the research from the past is going to apply to now. And I think that it might be all the more important to have a sort of grieving ritual and gathering when people can, even if it's not the traditional by the graveside, because that's already had to happen. But that doesn't mean you can't have a memorial service or something later, because I do, if you want to, right? And that's that sense of, self-agency that I think is so important. And that could be really important and really helpful. But
Okay.
as I said, the research isn't there yet about this. And the research that they tried to base it on, they don't have the same circumstances. It's not the same world.
Right, for sure. This is a bit of a change of the subject, but one of our listeners was asking about connecting virtually with a physician's office, because for many older adults, having your link with your primary care physician is really a big deal. And you've been doing a lot of work with that virtual connection stuff. How are you finding most physicians' offices are willing to do this, or what are you finding with older adults and that kind of way of connecting with physicians?
Well, first of all, they had a hard time getting a lot of physicians to do this. Sask Health has done a lot of things, like if you do a telehealth appointment, you get to bill extra, that kind of thing, to try and encourage physicians to do it. I believe that because of the pandemic, many physicians have discovered the benefits to it and convenience for it. So I think that going forward, we might see, I don't know the answer to this, but we might see more choices. Would you like to come in person? Would you like to be phone? Would you like to do it by video conferencing? I believe, you may not know this though, for physicians, they weren't allowed to bill for phone calls before.
Right.
So like some of this is structural and beyond physician preferences. They could have billed for telehealth video conferencing, and they could have billed extra, but then they would have also had to set that up, and it's an extra, infrastructure piece. So some of this is the system needs to be more flexible, to allow physicians to be more flexible, to allow people to say, yes, I might like this, and no, I would not like that, and to make decisions with their primary care provider about when it's appropriate to come in person and when isn't it, when is it required, when isn't it. So I do hope the future of healthcare is more flexible. But I don't know the answer to that, obviously. But one of the things I'm working on is writing, for at least for my area, is writing a framework for when to decide when you should do virtual care and when should it not work, and how to make those decisions. Because I think that's a really important question for the future. So.
Okay, because I would appreciate seeing some of that, because just the other day I made an appointment with my physician, and the nurse asked, would it be okay if we just do it by phone? She'll give you a call. And I said, yes, but I keep thinking, well, there's a lot of things I take for granted when I go to see her that we'll be able to talk about without me looking really obvious about it. And even trusting the fact that she might look at me and see something that signals to her. And over the phone, we're not going to get that. So a balance of when is the right and when is it wrong. It's certainly more efficient.
That's part of the problem.
I don't have to get in my car and drive there and sit in that waiting room for hours on end. But another question that's just come up is, Someone said, my handwriting in conversation has declined. Would some of this be natural aging as opposed to necessarily the pandemic being the causative factor?
I don't know.
Handwriting?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. No. I'm personally, so I can talk about me personally, I'm not writing at all right now. I have to do everything electronically because I'm working from home, and the only way to share things is electronically. So my handwriting's declined just because I don't need to and I'm not using it.
Yeah.
So it could be, but so yeah, and I think anything you don't practice is going to, be harder, but you can usually, and again, provided everything is not related to something else, like the stuff we talked about last time, which is, other indicators of, atypical aging. But if it's typical aging, but getting back in and practicing, you'll be able to get back to where you were, I believe. And I believe, with conversations, it's the conversations we have now, or even in the groups we do for socializing in the context of COVID remotely, it's not as good. People aren't able to see cues that, oh, it's my turn to speak, or all these things that we rely on. So we're missing a lot of that.
Sure.
So I do think there will be a period where it is going to be a little awkward and a little, stepping on someone's toes, or feel surreal, or feel anxiety provoking, or there's so many different potential reactions when we do go back into socializing in person without masks on. I do believe, though, with practice, it will get back.
Okay. But it does
I don't know the answer to that, though. I will say that I don't know.
Well, it does.
My optimism.
It just strikes me that something like handwriting, I just think about my mother, and she always had very fast handwriting, but as she aged, her ability to put her thoughts and translate them through her hand and make those things, it did seem to deteriorate. And it wasn't severe, but it wasn't through lack of practice necessarily. It's just that the hand-eye coordination, cognitive thing maybe was a little bit slower.
So yeah, as we age, we have something called cognitive aging, which is, you can't get away from it. It happens to everyone. And one of the biggest things that changes is speed of mental processing. So that impacts a whole bunch of different things.
Right. Okay. And another question, and we're just about at the end here, but it had to do with, I mean, it's kind of out of the blue here, but vaccine hesitancy. And older adults, we've had all this science dumped on us. They're saying that this is safe, but do you notice anything in the clients that you're working with, that there's more or less hesitancy amongst that than young people? It would just be a guess.
That's what I did a lit review on, because I didn't actually know the answer to that. Because I might have expected older adults to have less vaccine hesitancy, because they tend to be the group who's more likely to get the regular flu shot, for instance, more likely to get vaccine hit. And I can't remember what this research found, but I think I was surprised there weren't differences in vaccine hesitancy in groups of older adults anyway. So, and I do recognize we've had a bit of a challenge with communication around one of the vaccines that is unfortunate. But most of the vaccines being offered here in Saskatoon, for instance, are some of the newer tech vaccines that certainly have been shown to be very safe and effective. And hopefully that doesn't translate into a lot of hesitancy, because that's, yeah. But as far as I know, there's no age-related differences in hesitancy across the groups, at least from my lit review that I could find last night.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. And I'm hoping that many of those who are listening who are in some of the older age categories actually have had a chance to connect, make an appointment, and go for their vaccine. So I'll put that plug in there. But thank you so much, Dr. O'Connell. It's been great talking to you again. I think we could have gone on for another hour, and who knows, they may ask us again. But in the meantime, thanks a lot. And I'll turn it back over to Jane for a few concluding remarks.
Well, yes, thank you very much, Megan and Shan. That was just a really interesting conversation to listen into. And I think probably all of us learned a few things and have some more food for thought in terms of our own response and our own resiliency. And I'd really like to thank you very much, Megan, for taking the time once again to provide yourself as a resource to us at SCOA. And thank you, Shan, for moderating. At this time, I'd also like to thank Cynthia and June, who in the background have been doing all our technology, and Shoshana's been supporting them. So thank you for that as well. Our next coffee break is going to be called Budgets with Bruce. And Bruce is someone who is currently the treasurer on our SCOA board and has been in the past and is a really good presenter. So his presentation will be on May 12th at 1:30 p.m. And I hope you'll be able to tune in on that. We'd also really appreciate if you'd stay online after the webinar closes to answer just a couple of questions on a survey. It helps us to improve these coffee chats, which we've had some really good uptake, and we've had some really good comments and feedback. So we'd appreciate you continuing to provide that feedback to us. So thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate you tuning in. This program will be on our SCOA YouTube if you want to listen to it or recommend it to some friends to listen to later. Thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon.